Um, with me today, I have got Paul Flewitt. Paul Flewitt, born and raised in Sheffield, Yorkshire, is a writer of horror and dark fantasy and has contributed to several very prestigious anthologies. Paul, hello. Yeah.
Hi.
First question, which genre do you write in and how do you define that genre?
As you said, I write horror and dark fantasy. I first found it through my dad. From a very young age, my dad always encouraged us to read really widely, and so fantasy was his domain. And as I got older, I discovered horror, and that became my thing. Fantasy is something that I still come back to a lot, and it creeps into my writing. So that's exactly why, that's where it all comes from. It all comes from where I started reading and what first attracted me to stories.
What were those first dark fantasies and horrors that you were looking at?
Lord of the Rings was the first adult book that my dad introduced me to. Never told me that I didn't have to read all the appendices, so I struggled through all the appendices. Took me months of reading genealogies and all that sort of stuff. But as soon as I got to the story, I just loved it.
Like fucking child abuse.
I got lost in Middle Earth, and I was sad to leave it when it came to the end.
Yeah, I was talking actually with a student this morning who we were talking about books that we'd read as children, and she's the second person who said that she picked up Dennis Wheatley when she was far too young to be reading Dennis Wheatley, but it had sort of like given her such an appetite for horror and for the supernatural. And yeah, I've spoken to somebody else. Sorry, go on, Paul.
My dad tried me with Dennis Wheatley, and I just couldn't. His politics creeps into his stuff far too much, and I got really angry. He tried getting me to read The Car of Hilary Gifford.
Right.
And I got about 50, 60 pages into it, and I ended up throwing it across the room and said, "Dad, what the hell have you tried getting me to read here?"
Do you find that politics can, I'm going a little bit off script here, but do you find that if a writer's politics start to intrude on the narrative, that it can take you out of the story?
If it doesn't have anything to do with the story, then yes. The Dennis Wheatley story, it's for people who don't know it, it's a story about a guy who comes back from the dead to haunt his wife. And for some reason, Dennis Wheatley saw it fit to go on a big, long, paragraphs-long tirade about how good nuclear war would be and how good nuclear weapons are. And I'm like, the hell are you talking about? What does this have to do with the story? So when it's like that, then yes. If there's a point to it, if, say, we're reading what I've just finished reading, actually, The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, then of course politics is going to come into that because it's a political book. It's a book about totalitarianism. It's a book about oppressed people. So of course politics are going to come into stories like that. So that doesn't take you out the story because it's part of it.
Yeah.
But when it's no part of it, then it's like, yeah, this is a vehicle for something else now.
Yeah, yeah, this is you with your fucking agenda, Mr. Wheatley, and yeah, there's no need for it. What's your writing schedule?
I write daily.
Right.
I'm a stay-at-home dad because I've got a young son, and my missus can earn far more in a day job than I can. So go back a bit. About 10 years ago, I was working, and during the financial crash of 2010, was it? I was really struggling to find work. So my wife said, well, and everyone was struggling to find work, but my wife said, look, you can write. So why don't you see what you can do with your writing? You take the kids to school and I'll get an office job. If you are still writing in a year, fantastic, we'll keep it as it is. If you're not, we'll see where job market is then. And I'm still writing. So something worked. So my schedule is I write when the kids go to school. I write longhand in all first drafts. So my mornings are spent typing up what I wrote the day before. My afternoons are spent writing new. So my days cut up like that. I'll write a little bit in the evenings if I don't feel like I've done enough through the day. So I treat it basically like a full-time job.
You've raised so many points there that, first of all, it's something that I keep going back to, but the support of family is so important to us, isn't it? Does your wife read your work as well?
She's not really a big horror lover, but she has. She doesn't read much of it. She'll read snippets. She tried reading my first book. She got to a certain scene and she just couldn't get past it. She just couldn't do it. In that scene, it describes the abduction of a mute girl and a subsequent murder. And my wife just could not get past that bit. She didn't accept that that's about as dark as it got. After that, it was a very human story. It's a story, my debut novel was based around grief. Right. And the different lengths and the different strange things that grief can make people do. So it was actually intensely sad and a very human and feeling and sensitive story is what came back from other readers that could get past that point. But yeah, my wife just can't do it.
And also writing in longhand. How come? Is it something about, why are you writing in longhand?
Two reasons. One, I am a shit typer. Right. So I just cannot write quickly enough to get the ideas down. So it never seems to flow as well if I'm typing as opposed to writing longhand. And the other reason, of course, is when I was younger, I didn't have a computer at home. So everything I wrote was on paper. So it's just the habit that I got into of writing longhand. Old-fashioned, but it works. It's the best way I find to get into a flow and to get that momentum going.
And yeah, it's not like, I mean, whilst I've got one of these damn things near me most of the time. If the battery goes on it, or if I run out of power, in that case, I'm screwed. Whereas you're never going to be screwed if you've got a pen and paper handy, are you?
You're not, but you also end up having crates and crates and crates and folders full of stuff that you've written that might end up as nothing, but you don't want to get rid of it just in case.
Yes, I know that too well. Yeah, I had the first. Sorry, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but the first full-length.
You're going as many tangents as you want. We've got time.
The first full-length manuscript I ever produced. I was really, really pleased with it. Sent it out to a couple of places and got rejections bouncing back, sort of like saying, nah, no thanks, not for us. Then I'd been working on a different story and that one got accepted. So I was thinking, yay, it's time to get this other one out and see if they would be interested in this first manuscript. So I said to my wife, where's that manuscript that we were going to keep safe? I think I put it in the garage. And she said, oh, you know, when I cleaned out the garage the other week, and yeah, back in the days when this was all typewritten rather than on a keyboard, and there was that one copy of it, and it still hurts. It still hurts.
I don't have that problem because my wife doesn't touch any of my writing. Everything is in a box under the bed, and that's where it stays. The boxes just get bigger.
Safest way to do it as well. What's most important to you, plot or character?
They're equally as important. The way that I describe it is that the character is the foundation and the plot is the walls that are built around it. So they're both equally as important.
The reason for the costume change and the brief interruption is weather here in the UK was affecting our connection. So we're back under better circumstances. Paul, thank you for returning. And to carry on with the questions we were asking before, what piece of writing advice would you give anybody who's just starting out?
Do I just get one piece of writing advice, or do I get many?
Go for it. Whatever works best for you.
Right. So I'm going to guess that most of the writers that you've spoken to are going to have told everybody how fluffy and how lovely it is to be a writer.
Couple of them,
So,
yeah.
so let's go for harsh reality, because I think that harsh reality is probably a little bit more helpful. Writing's hard. It's hard work, and 90% of it is not writing. Most of it is figuring out your market, figuring out where your audience is, and how to get your books to that market. It's writing synopses, which is the work of the devil, writing blurbs, writing query letters, and trying to research publishers and agents and lots of other things that definitely are not sitting at your desk looking all intelligent as if you know what you're doing and writing stories in different worlds. A lot of it is mind-numbingly boring. And the harsh reality is that for all that boring, only about 10% of writers actually make any money doing it. So it's fun, it's lovely, it's a great community. But don't set yourself up for disappointment by thinking that you're going to put something out in the world and all of a sudden you're going to be Stephen King, because the chances are that's not going to happen. So my advice to any new writer is have fun with it. It's supposed to be fun. If you want to write as a hobby, that's fine. None of this matters to you because you don't care, because you're doing it as a hobby, as a thing to do in your spare time. You may publish, you may not, but it probably doesn't matter to you that much. But if you're doing it with any thoughts of success, you need to temper what your idea of success is, because for a lot of people, success is publishing a book and getting that book in their hand and just telling a good story. So let that be enough. And then whatever else follows is a happy bonus.
Do you know, I couldn't agree more with that. It's
I know it sounds so depressing, and it sounds like I'm really sort of trying to not sell being a writer. But the fact is that so many people come into the industry with these wide eyes that it's going to be X, Y, and Z thing. And then within 3 months, they find out how difficult it is and they fall away. So I'd rather tell people the truth.
And yeah, I don't think it helps that when I was growing up, I read a lot of Stephen King and a lot of Dean R. Koontz. And if there was a writer in one of those stories, they would write their first novel whilst they were at college, and they would just happen to send it to one of the big 4 publishers, and it would hit the bestsellers list. And it's one of the tropes that we see every time in stories, that as soon as somebody sits down to write a novel, it's a novel that's going to go on the Sunday Times bestseller list.
But what Stephen King doesn't tell you in any of those books is that he actually wrote while he worked in a laundry for years. He wrote while he was teaching for years, and he failed and he failed and he failed until his wife rescued Carrie out of the fire because he didn't like it and told him that he must finish that book. And he finished it, and it became his #1 bestseller. Strange how things happen.
Even Carrie, I think it got rejected more than a dozen times before it was actually accepted and went on, which when you
if I remember rightly he had a nail at the side of his desk in his attic room where he wrote, and the nail became a hook and the hook became a spike. That's how many rejection letters Stephen King got.
Yeah, I was doing a session yesterday with students, sort of like talking about rejection and how you've got to get over rejection. Yeah, we all get rejected.
Absolutely.
And yeah, your advice there is absolutely spot on. Yeah, it's about so much more than writing. And yeah, going in there with rose tinted glasses, it's not going to be good for anybody, really, is it? Who do you read for pleasure?
Anything and anyone. I was brought up by a dad who was deep into fantasy, but he also read crime thrillers and spy sagas and westerns and comedies and non-fiction. So, yes, my diet is mostly sci-fi, fantasy and horror, but I will also read historical fiction and non-fiction and comedy. And basically, if it's well written, then I'll read it.
Do you think that that eclectic mixture of writing feeds into what you actually produce as an author?
Yes, because it gives you an understanding of how different genres construct their story. I think I was telling you before, and it surprised you that I said that writing is based or it stands and falls on the foundation of character and the walls of storytelling.
Yes.
Different genres go about that differently. So, such as for a Western, or the Westerns that I've read, they're mostly character-based and not situation-based.
Right.
So it's understanding how different genres do things and how you can bring that to what you do, to try and not do something new, but do something different that may not have been done that much before in the genre that you write in.
Paul, I needed you 4 years ago when I was starting out on my PhD.
But I'm here now.
Yeah, you're here now that it's written. You can sort of like read it and say, well, that's wrong. You got that completely out of play.
Now, you see, this is the thing about creative writing, and this is something that I would argue with any college lecturer or university professor about. And it's something that I hear time and time again from students who I speak to. And that is, in creative writing, there is no right and wrong. There's only your opinion of what works and what doesn't. So, and I've said this to a couple of teachers, don't tell me I'm wrong. Just tell me you don't agree. Yeah. Don't mark me as wrong. Just tell me that that's not in the curriculum, because I may not be wrong. And the readers that read my stuff tell me that I'm not wrong.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. This is one of the reasons why I'm doing these, so that people can sort of like see different authors and their different approaches to it. My way is not the only way, and your way is not the only way. Nobody's got the one single way to actually write a story. And
absolutely not. And I will temper everything that I've said in this video or anything that anybody ever sees me write online. Any advice? Look, every single interview that I have with a blog or a journalist always says, what's your advice for X, Y, and Z thing? What's your view on X, Y, and Z thing? And it happens to all writers. The basic thing is, I can tell you how I do it, but that may not work for you.
Yeah.
You have to find your own process. So I suppose the only bit of advice that I will offer that is not basically, only salient to me is listen to all the advice, try it, discard what you don't like, bring in what you do like, and try it. And if it works for you, brilliant. I mean, I'm a pantser, which means that I don't plan or plot anything. I just sit down with a pen and paper and I write. And what comes out can be fixed in editing. And that's the way that I work. But I don't work for everybody. Some people get lost and they can't write. I mean, the project that I'm working on now is 120,000 words. Right. Someone couldn't do that. So another person couldn't do that without a plan and a plot. So I would never advise anyone to be a plotter or a pantser. But if it works for you, do it. Try it.
Yeah, fully agree. Yeah, I think, yeah. And
which has just rendered this entire project meaningless, because nothing that I tell anybody actually matters, because I may just be talking absolute crap.
I think with your reputation, the idea that you're talking crap is pretty much out the window and doesn't apply. But yeah, I fully agree.
Reputation precedes you when people run a mile.
So your short fiction has appeared in some impressive anthologies, including Matt Shaw's The Many Deaths of Edgar Allan Poe and Masters of Horror. How does the writing of short fiction differ from producing longer works, and which do you prefer and why?
For me, it doesn't differ, because I approach it in exactly the same way. The only thing that's different is that the end comes a lot sooner with short stories than it does with longer fiction. Obviously, I'm being flippant. With short writing, it takes a lot more discipline. You can't be as free in what you're doing, because you have a set amount of words to be able to do what it is that you want to do. So you have to learn how to get to where you want to go and still have all of the elements of what you would put in a longer work into a tighter space, which means that you have to be more concise about your words. You have to be better at your description. It's a good exercise in discipline for a start. And it's a good exercise in how to say a lot in a little space, which helps you avoid what I call the Stephen King syndrome of waffle. Because although I do love Stephen King, he goes on and on and on and on about things that don't fucking matter.
Yeah.
Short stories, and even Stephen King's short story can run to 300 pages, which tells you a lot about what it is that he does that annoys a lot of people, and that knocks Stephen King down people's pecking order and maybe takes away from his view as a literary being. So short stories, when you have to write to 10,000 words, 5,000 words, 3,000 words, you have to be concise, and you have to be really, really brutal with yourself.
Which can be hard. Now, when you sort of like say, when you work into a set amount of words, does that come when you sort of like send a call for submission somewhere and you're thinking, you know what, I could produce something? Or do you sort of like have a personal idea of what the length of a short story should be?
It depends. It depends what I'm writing for. Now, generally speaking, these days I'm invited to write for anthologies, so I don't really do open calls.
Right.
In my early time, then it was open calls, and it was, there's a subject that I found, see, it's 2,000 to 5,000 words, let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
Which is where you learn your craft, because you have 2,000 to 5,000 words to do what you need to do. Now I get a bit more leeway, so I'll talk to the editor and I'll say, well, how many words do you want? 2,000 to 5,000 words. You know, how many words do you really want? And then it's, well, please try and keep it to that, but if it's 1,000 over or 1,000 under, it doesn't really matter that much. So I get a little bit more leeway generally, which I use quite a lot.
In which way? Do you go over or do you go under?
Much of the time I go over.
Right. Because
I'm a writer. I don't adhere to rules. Rules? What rules?
Oh, thank God you're not in my
I try my best to do what I can, you know, to keep it reasonable. So, but if it's sort of 500 words over, or, you know, then it's neither here nor there, really.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that does explain an awful lot. So your novel, Poor Jeffrey, finished in the top 5 of a Predators and Editors readers poll. What does it mean to you to have your work validated in such a way?
Have you seen me speak about awards before by any chance?
No, I haven't.
You haven't?
No, no.
Right. So this is where, if you had read what I've said about awards before, then this is where I come across as all hypocritical. Because the Predators and Editors Award meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
Even being nominated top 3 was great, as far as I was concerned. But it was a readers' poll. Right. So the readers of Predators and Editors got the lists, and I came second. First, I believe that year with Chantal Naudeluz, and she's brilliant, and I voted for her. And I believe she won by the odd vote. But the fact is that it meant a lot because it was a reader's vote.
Yeah.
Now, if you ask me about things like Stoker's or any of the other industry awards, they're meaningless, really, because the readers don't care about them. And a lot of the time, they are voted on by a panel who don't know who you are, who have likely never read your work and really probably don't give a crap about who you are unless you're in their little circle of friends.
Right.
So that's my perception of it. It's pretty much proven right every year by who is on the winners list.
Yeah.
You know, what these votes are calculated and decided by. So to me, if I get one, lovely, brilliant. If I don't really care. It doesn't make any difference. It's not going to sell me another 50 books. So I really, it's meaningless. It's a nice tag to have, but really, I'd rather have people tell me in reviews that what I'm doing is all right.
I completely get that. And yeah, with the Predators and Editors readers poll being a readers poll, yeah, that does give it far more weight, really, doesn't it? It's not that this has been sort of like something that's been decided on by industry professionals, but the important people who actually buy the books, read them, and enjoy them. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you were around or if you remember a few years ago, in the wake of James Herbert dying, Penguin, I think it was, had an award for best debutant author.
Right.
And the guy who won it was not a debutant author. He was a guy that had already written a book and was on to his third or fifth book. I can't remember which. But he was already signed to the publishing company and he won the award. Well, surprise, surprise. And that was met with a lot of eye rolling and, well, we didn't see that coming. And that's now the way I feel about most awards when I look at who wins these things and who they're friends with and possibly why they're winning those awards. And that's not to say that they're not writing good stuff.
Yeah.
Because most of them are writing brilliant stuff, and that's not to take away from if they feel that it's an achievement and an honor, that's fine. That's great. Brilliant. But for me, it's not that important.
Would you, and it's sort of like a tangential question, but in light of what you've just said then, would you advise young writers and burgeoning writers to enter competitions?
For what reason? So why would they? Obviously, someone who's just starting out,
yeah,
competition is good practice. It gets you experience in the submissions process, in a way. It's not exactly like submissions, but it's writing to a guideline or writing to a call. So from that respect, yeah, fine. But for me, I mean, I never did. I've never written for competition or anything like that because I didn't really see the point.
Right.
If I'm going to write for a competition, then I'll find a submission call and I'll write to the submission call. And I'm still not going to make any money because another little industry secret: anthologies don't really make money. Anthologies break even usually at best.
Yeah.
So another little industry secret: I very rarely charge for anthologies. Right. I very rarely take a royalty from an anthology because I know how hard it is for the press. And generally I'm writing for an independent or small press. So I would rather, because I know that any funds that they make is going to go into making the next anthology and be an opportunity for other new writers to get on the ladder and get some experience. So all I will say is for anthologies, I want a physical copy.
Yeah.
And that's it. So I'm writing for a book, basically.
But also that's a really good way of getting your name out there as well, isn't it? People, because if there's an anthology and you're in there and somebody's not heard of you, but they've heard of a couple of other people who are there, they're going to sort of like buy that book and then they get a chance to get exposed to your writing. So yeah, I completely get that. But yeah, I love the way that you are paying that forward. So on your Amazon page, it says that you write only for the thrill of scaring readers in new and inventive ways. Do you ever feel as though you've reached the limit of inventive ways to scare readers, or is this a limitless resource for you?
That was written probably 10 years ago, when I was that person that we were talking about earlier, all bright-eyed and filled with wonder about entering this brave new world and trying to find a way to market myself that sounded exciting and new. My ideas have probably changed. I'd probably change that now.
Right.
Because it's hyperbolic, basically. Now I realise there's not really new and inventive ways to do anything. All there is the way that you do something, and that makes it new and inventive, if you understand, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
People can tell the story, but they can't tell my story.
Yeah.
You know, I could give you Paul Jeffrey and you would tell that story in a completely different way.
The example I usually use with students is tell them to watch The Wizard of Oz and then tell them to watch Wicked. And yeah, you sort of like got the same story, but from two completely different perspectives.
Yes. So in a way with that tagline, I'm lying, because most stories are based on probably the same 5 tropes, most of which can be found in the Bible and Shakespeare and the Epic of Gilgamesh and any ancient writing that you want to, it's all there. So most books are based around the same familiar tropes: the Mephisto trope, the good guy, bad guy trope, the jilted lover trope, the reluctant hero. There's only so many ways that you can tell a story, although there are various different ways of telling that story and wrapping it up, and that's individual. So yes, while a lot of my stuff, well, Clive Barker did that back in 1987. Well, he might have done, but Clive Barker ain't me, and I'm not Clive Barker.
And I think that's one of the things that I do keep sort of like encountering, where people say, "Oh, I want to write something that's original," and no, don't. It will be original when your voice is on it, but don't start thinking, "Oh, well, this has been done and that's been done and somebody else has." Originality is overrated, really, isn't it?
Sort of latching onto that, though, there's a lot about writers finding their voice as if it's something that's unique and it's very particular to them.
Yeah.
What people then sort of do is they go out of their way to not write like X writer or Y writer or Z writer. Yeah. That's not what it means, because your voice is an amalgam of everything that you read, everything that you enjoy, everything that you watch and appreciate. That all forms what I call your literary choir. And the literary choir is all of your influences, which go into making you the writer that you are, and that forms your voice. Exactly the same as a person. You are an amalgam of your mum, your dad, your uncle, and anybody else that influences you throughout your life. You take from here, you take from there, you take from somewhere else, and become the person that you are. And that's exactly the same as a writer. You pinch a little bit from there, pinch a little bit from here, and then you have your own voice.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. Does that mean that when we are selecting fiction to read, we should only be looking at good stuff, so that it improves the quality of what we're doing? And is there a chance that if I start reading a load of crap fiction, that it's going to be detrimental to my writing style?
No, I don't think that's a given.
Right.
I read everything because I can learn from the good stuff and I can learn from the bad stuff too.
Right.
I wrote about this on Facebook. I do a lot of talking in groups on Facebook, generally talking crap, but occasionally I'll say something that makes sense.
Can I just underscore that with anybody who's watching this? If you're not already following Paul on Facebook, follow him, because he says some very interesting and wise and occasionally contentious things. But I think, the contentious might be deliberate. I
learn from the good. Obviously, you're going to learn from good writing, because good writing is good writing. But what I was talking about online a few weeks ago was, when I was younger, I stopped enjoying writing. I stopped enjoying reading.
Right.
And I didn't know why. And I found that I was being very analytical, because what I would do is I'd read a story and I'd not like it, and then I'd have to go back through it and pick out why it was that I didn't enjoy it. But that's what makes you a good writer, because you go back through and you say, well, if I were writing this story, I wouldn't do this, or I wouldn't do that, or I'd do this a little bit differently. And you find the reasons that this story didn't work for you, or that you think that this writer is not a great writer. You know what they're trying to do, but why did it not sort of gel? Is it just me, or is it something that they did? And then you learn the lessons that way. So you can learn just as much from bad writing or perceived bad writing, because what I think is bad writing, somebody else will think is fantastic. Everybody has an audience, otherwise they wouldn't be publishing.
I mean, when you look at the best-selling novel that the United Kingdom has ever seen is 50 Shades of Grey, and the majority of people that you speak to sort of like belittle it and go, it's got this fault, it's got this fault, it's got this fault. Several million readers did not think it had got faults. They thought, yeah, let me buy this one, the next one, and the one after. So yeah, bad writing.
The most maligned writer that in recent years that I've really enjoyed has been Dan Brown.
Yeah, God, can he write a cliffhanger?
Now, the thing about Dan Brown is that he writes to a formula.
Yeah.
And it's the same formula in all of his books, but you know what? It works. And his books are entertaining. And sometimes you don't want a book that's all high-flighty, intellectual, that you have to really consider and focus on. Sometimes you just want to read a bloody good book. Yeah. And that's what Dan Brown brings. He's the pop music, whereas somebody like Clive Barker is more like classical music.
Yeah, yeah. He's like a McDonald's, isn't he? He's sort of like satisfying, tasty. You know what you're getting when you go in there, and yeah, you seldom come away disappointed.
That's it.
Yeah,
and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, there isn't. Yeah, people seem to forget that one of the things that we do as writers is we're producing a commodity for people to actually purchase, and yeah, it needs to be a good commodity. It needs to be entertaining. Paul, final question for you. What are you currently working on, and where can we find more of your work?
You can find my work on Amazon.
Right.
Is the best place to go. Just search my name, and it'll come up. Should come up with anthologies and a novel and a novelette. What I'm working on now. What am I not working on now? I have a horror novel that's out for submission. I have a horror novel that is very close to completion. In fact, as soon as I'm done talking to you, I'm going back to work on that now. Right. I have an urban sort of darkish fantasy trilogy that I'm working on. I've written 2 books already, and I'm planning the 3rd. I say I don't plot and plan. For this, I'm plotting and planning because there's a lot that's gone into book 1 and 2. And because I'm a glutton for punishment, I have a grimdark project that I started that just came from an idea. It came from a phrase that was niggling away at me for weeks. And so I started writing it over Christmas. And now, of course, it wants to be probably a novel. So that's another project that I have that I'm working on. So lots of work.
Paul, that's a hell of a lot of work. Right, I'm going to, I hope an awful lot of my students search you out on Amazon. And thank you so much for that. That was incredibly useful. Thank you.
No problem.